Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about how BRICS is evolving from a Russia-China dream to a potential United States nightmare. And the United States has a lot to worry about when it comes to BRICS as an organization. Back in the 1990s and early 2000s, the United States was pretty clearly the dominant power throughout the world. It was pretty much undisputed that the United States was the sole superpower within the world. But BRICS provides a lot of power to the supplier nations, to the producer nations throughout the world. And we see that BRICS has recently expanded to include places like Argentina, places like Ethiopia, and these extra countries are Saudi Arabia is joining, which is a huge one. These extra countries also are producer supplier nations, and they are providing more support for that perspective in the world. These countries are able to dictate terms that are beneficial to the suppliers, to the producers throughout the world, instead of a buyer-focused world. It doesn't make overly much sense, and I've talked about this in other videos, but if you go to a supermarket and you say, I want to buy this for $1, and they say, but this is actually $10, you're not getting it for $1. That's not how things typically work. But in the world of international economies, the United States and the other purchaser nations, they typically dictate terms to a very large extent for what the prices are for various goods, and the producer supplier nations just have to go with it. But BRICS, because of its expansion and because of its base as a China-Russia kind of bloc, it's able to circumvent the United States because China is a manufacturing powerhouse and Russia is a resource-rich powerhouse. Russia has the most natural resources of any country in the world, and between them and China's industrial base, they're able to do quite a bit to circumvent the United States. So let's look at what this article says. Global interests among nations seeking to join the BRICS economic bloc, led by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is demonstrating its growing influence as a new geopolitical force with the potential to challenge the largely Western-led financial system. And this article was a few months ago. And so this was before countries like Saudi Arabia ended up joining the bloc. And you see just these predictions have been happening not only for months, but for years, and to a certain extent, even decades, because Vladimir Putin talked to people like Joe Biden, telling him, listen, if you don't work with us, if you don't allow us to join the Western-led order, we're going to have to work with China. And Joe Biden, this was decades ago, it was at least years ago, I can't remember the exact date, I think it was the early 2000s, said, fine, go work with China, we don't care. The United States forgot that its entire philosophy, its entire perspective, its entire paradigm throughout the 1900s was to keep Russia and Germany decoupled. They wanted to pit those two against each other because Germany was a manufacturing base and Russia was a resource-rich country, and you didn't want to have those two things together. It's a difficult pairing to defeat if you have those two together. Well, what they didn't realize was either one of those countries, Germany or Russia, could go to another country that also has that type of complementary economy. And Germany, being completely controlled by the United States at this point, didn't have that option to pivot to another resource-rich country. Whereas Russia, though, which was not within the sphere of influence of the United States, did have the option of pivoting towards another industrial manufacturing-based country, and that was China. We see here a fateful conference this summer. Again, that's where all these various other countries ended up joining BRICS, or at least being led into BRICS. They'll officially join in January of 2024. Main drivers are to do with an overall belief that the United States has become both unreliable and overbearing in its foreign policy. So just to give you an idea, any type of cooperation is an iterative game unless it's the only time you're going to be cooperating. So if it's the only time you're going to be cooperating, sure. I mean, it's psychopathic, but you can get as much as you want from the arrangement. You could screw the other person over. They're not going to have a chance to retaliate. I'm not arguing for that, but I'm just saying in a non-iterative game that is entirely possible. In an iterative game, though, where you're repeating the game over and over and over again, you can't do that. The United States, though, is completely unreliable. They say something and then they do the complete opposite. And that worked for a little while because countries just said, well, they have a new person in charge. They have a new political party in charge. It was the last party that screwed us over. It was the last political candidate that screwed us over. But other countries are starting to wise up to the fact that despite the fact that there are different figureheads in power, there is a similar consistent foreign policy that benefits certain people within the United States. And because these people within the various political parties within the duopoly are willing to screw over anyone at any point in time, and they don't keep to any agreements, they're unreliable, other countries have recognized this and have decided to not work with the United States, or at the very least not trust the agreements that are made with the United States when they're forced to work with the United States. A lot of countries are still forced to work with the United States because the United States has geopolitical goals that they want to reach, such as in Asia, and so there's a lot of smaller Asian powers that are forced to go along with whatever the United States dictates. So we see here, this article is saying that the United States is overbearing in that it used international mechanisms to punish countries it doesn't agree with. So cutting countries off from SWIFT. So that's a huge problem. And it shows the desperation, and it shows the weakness of the United States that they actually use SWIFT in this way, because these institutions, these international institutions, have to be trusted. And the more countries that you take out of the system or that you punish using these mechanisms, the less trusted these systems are going to be. And so you might have countries that are punished through international mechanisms, such as Venezuela or in Iran. And other countries look at this and say, okay, they're a small minor country. It's not going to happen to me, right? They say they must have done something wrong. They deserve to be treated like this, blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't help that the Western-led media and entertainment sector does vilify the Western world's enemies. However, when a country like Russia or a country like China, which has very strong relationships with the vast majority of the countries in the world, when they face these similar punishments through international mechanisms, these smaller countries look at this and say, wait a minute, that could be us. But there's still hope. The hope is because China and because Russia are actually doing a good job of fighting off these unfair usages of international mechanisms, because Russia and China are able to fight those off, that is giving hope to these other countries that a parallel system might arise. The constant crises in the United States, such as the debt ceiling crises, G7, completely useless at this point. The BRICs nations are more dominant, more powerful. Along nearly every metric you look at, the BRICS countries are more important in the modern world than the G7. So alliances like BRICS are generating a lot of interest. In fact, the one country that I was kind of surprised didn't join BRICS this recent round is Turkey. It could be because they're a part of NATO and they still have some ambitions to be part of the European Union, but I was actually very surprised that they did not join BRICS, considering the way the wind is blowing in that alliance. Because when you think about it, Brazil, the top power in Latin America, is in BRICS. Argentina is going to officially be in BRICS. That's the second biggest power in Latin America. I believe, I can't remember if Mexico is bigger than Argentina, but it's at least second or third. Mexico would probably love to join BRICS, but because of the fact that the United States is already talking about invading Mexico, I don't know how likely they are to actually be given that opportunity to join BRICS, particularly because the United States constantly foments drug cartels and various other forms of criminal activity within Mexico. But all those countries within Latin America are very interested in BRICS. Then you have places like South Africa and Ethiopia, two of what I would consider the three most important countries in Africa, either in BRICS or about to join BRICS. Ethiopia is going to join BRICS in January. Nigeria is another one of those countries that I think really would have benefited from joining BRICS, but it's too far into America's camp. Libya used to be another one of those major powers within Africa, but the United States completely destroyed that and turned it into an open-air slave market. So all these countries throughout the entire world, all the major countries, are pivoting towards BRICS. They're pivoting towards the east, right? And so the wind is blowing in a certain direction. So very surprised Turkey didn't go in that direction too. The global leaders across the entire world joining BRICS. We see that Goldman Sachs are the people who originally started the BRICS acronym, and then it became an actual thing. They started meeting these countries. These were really the big developing nations. Another big country that I thought would actually really join BRICS would be Vietnam. I'm even more surprised by Vietnam not joining BRICS because they've expressed interest, but I thought they'd be in this prior round. But they're less in the, less under the thumb, less dominated by the United States. And so I was actually very surprised that they didn't join. It might be the case that they're trying to provide, paint themselves as an alternative to China for an industrial base. And so they don't want to be entirely within the sphere of influence of China as well. That could be it. I still think it would have been in their best interest to join BRICS this prior round. So here they're saying that globalization has reached a new stage of its development associated with the formation of different alliances. And we see some pretty clear dividing lines being drawn. Nearly every developing nation is pretty unequivocally within the BRICS camp at this point. You have a few, like I mentioned, Vietnam, Turkey, Mexico. Two of the three there are outliers just because of the fact that they're scared of the United States. But I think that eventually they will join BRICS, particularly as America's power and the ability to punish other countries is kind of waning at this point. And one benefit of BRICS is that mutual respect and equality are things that BRICS cares about. They treat other countries with respect. They treat them as equals. United States, when you go to the United States, you're subservient to the United States. You're bowing to them. You're doing what they say. And obviously countries like Saudi Arabia, which benefited a lot from the Western-led order, even they're like, for the long-term sustainability of our country, we have to pivot towards China and Russia. We have to. Very visionary leadership by MBS there, the leader of Saudi Arabia, because he could have kind of kicked the can down the line and said, this is someone else's problem. I'm going to enjoy the benefits of being under the thumb of America for now. But he foresaw that he could get more benefits by pivoting east a lot earlier, a lot sooner. And I think that's going to benefit Saudi Arabia in the long term. So a multipolar world is forming, and one aspect of this multipolarity, which I've talked about before, is the fact that we're starting to realize that modernization and westernization are not synonyms. We've typically used them as synonyms. They shouldn't be used as synonyms. Countries can modernize, they can have an industrial base, they can move up the value chain without being westernized. And when I talk about westernization, I talk about Western culture, Judeo-Christian values, things like the way the Western world does democracies based off of things like Greek philosophy, Athenian democratic principles as kind of its origination point. That type of stuff, that westernization, the Greco-Roman world, the Judeo-Christian religion, that doesn't have to be the basis for industrialization, modernization. Okay? So westernization is not the same as modernization. So these countries are diversifying where they go to, who they talk with, who they collaborate with. And this cooperation strengthens these countries' ability to be resilient in the face of Western sanctions, Western punishments that are, I would say, particularly unfair. When you look at how Russia treated, or how the United States treated Serbia, it is very different from how they're treating, say, Ukraine. If you look at something like Kosovo, Kosovo has a majority Muslim population, and it's historically been a part of Serbia. Now, if the United States was applying the same logic that they're doing in Ukraine, then the Crimean population, which is majority Russian, would be allowed to gain independence from Ukraine. But because they're applying completely the opposite logic and saying that no, because it's historically been a part of Ukraine, which it hasn't been historically a part of Ukraine for very long, Crimea has to stay a part of Ukraine. Whereas in the Serbia case, they said Kosovo, they have the freedom to choose their own, if they want to be independent or not, even if they've historically been a part of Serbia. So completely polar opposites. And that's the lovely thing about the modern world. We have direct examples of the United States and their rules-based order doing the complete opposite things of what they've done in the past. So their rules-based order literally can hold in their mind complete opposites, complete opposites there. That's why I love bringing up Serbia whenever people start talking about Ukraine. And then the supporters, the NATO people, say, well, I was against the Serbia stuff anyways. No, you weren't. You definitely weren't. You take the American position no matter what. And the American position can be complete polar opposites, and you will still take that position. That's just how these paid actors work. Interest among developing countries to join the new development bank is driven by dual dynamics. First, there is a lack of development financing options open to the global south. So there was a recent study that I believe Ben Norden posted on Twitter. I'm never going to call it X. X is a stupid name. That's one of the things that Elon Musk did wrong. Just for things like search engine optimization, you should not name something a single letter. It's a horrible, horrible idea. So Twitter, Ben Norden posted about how countries that get IMF loans end up being worse off than if they'd not gotten the IMF loans. And so we see here that things like the New Development Bank, which is a BRICs-led bank, and also somewhat of a competitor, I would say, to IMF, when they offer financing options, it's more beneficial to these developing countries. It has less stringent requirements for getting that aid. So the New Development Bank opens another set of options for these countries in addition to traditional development finance sources like the World Bank and IMF. Second, a smaller subset of developing countries has complicated relationships with Western powers, especially in relation to sanctions. For countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia, the New Development Bank represents a potential source of financing and influence outside of forums dominated by Western norms and different forms of conditionally linked financing from institutions like the World Bank. So places like Iran, they're constantly sanctioned by the West, and they're looking for ways of circumventing that and still getting finance and still getting some sort of funding. Saudi Arabia, though, recognizes that they have a gun to their head at all times. They are, if they ever pivot against the United States, which they are doing, then the United States will start screaming about human rights abuses. That's what the United States does, by the way. The CIA and other intelligence community organizations, they used to be the ones directly fomenting rebellions within countries, but now what they do is they foment these color revolutions saying that the countries are not democratic enough, or they have human rights abuses, et cetera, et cetera. And so what you're going to see in the coming years is Saudi Arabia pivoted in a different direction than the United States. And you're going to see that color revolutions start happening there. The United States starts talking about human rights abuses within Saudi Arabia more. And Saudi Arabia understands this. They understand that the United States is going to work against them directly from this point on. And so they wouldn't have made the decision to join the BRICS alliance if they didn't plan on defending themselves properly, if they didn't have a plan to defend themselves properly from the Western-led world. Okay, so, and we also see that Saudi Arabia and Iran are getting closer with each other in recent years. They've started to realize that a lot of things that they blamed on each other was actually just the United States and Israel fomenting tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and that they actually have more in common than they suspected. So while Van Staden stated that China and Russia have their own preoccupations around the use of the dollar targeted sanctions that are contributing to the sudden momentum in exploring alternative currency trade, he also said he was struck by the relatively quick engagement from the rest of the developing world. Okay, so places like Russia, after the Ukrainian 2014 coup, the Maidan coup, Russia tried to wean itself off of the US dollar. And to a large extent, it did not work. And Vladimir Putin was rightfully concerned that his country wouldn't survive if they didn't wean themselves off the dollar. Well, it turned out that all they needed was some pressure from the West. So the West just taking away their usage of the dollar, which they did after Russia started its special military operation. And Russia would completely decouple from the US dollar. And China is in a very similar situation where they're getting to use the dollar less and less. They're getting punished using dollar mechanisms more and more. And they're saying, well, actually, we can wean ourselves off of this too. And China, for a long time, also tried to wean itself off the US dollar. But until United States pressure started to arise, they had a lot of trouble getting people to quit using dollars. And so United States pressure, United States sanctions, United States unilateral usage of international mechanisms has actually sped up the de-dollarization, not only of these two countries, but it put the fear of retribution, you could even say the fear of God, in these other developing countries, because they recognize that if this could happen to places like Russia and China, it could also happen to them. And I don't think they felt that same way whenever these types of things happen to Venezuela or happen to a Cuba or happen to an Iran or happen to a North Korea. But when it happens to places like Russia and China, people take notice. So the new global order that's coming, the developing world recognizes that they can have a larger degree of influence if they pivot towards China or Russia, versus if they go with the United States-led world, everyone suffers from that. And that's the thing where there's been a recent crisis in the news where Canada is accusing India of certain things. And you might be asking yourselves, well, why is Canada and to a certain extent the United States, because the United States provided the information on the thing that Canada and India are having a dispute over, why is the United States attacking India? And it's for the same reason that they used to attack Saudi Arabia, which is that they have a carrot and stick approach, but the carrot doesn't work anymore. Countries have recognized that the United States did build up Japan and Germany after World War II, but then both of those countries ended up suffering in the long term from being under the United States' thumb. Things like the Plaza Accords completely destroyed Japan and Japanese industry. And we see that the United States very likely attacked Nord Stream, which was the energy infrastructure of Germany. And Germany is currently deindustrializing. And so the United States, I think, has become aware of the fact that they don't have a carrot anymore. They don't have the soft power to actually incentivize countries to woo them over. They can't say, you're going to be better off if you join us. So what they're doing is they say, listen, India, we need your people to die. We need your people to be meat shields for us in a war against China. And if you don't do that, we're going to threaten you. So instead of having a carrot, which they know is not going to work at this point, no country is going to believe that the United States is going to help them, benefit them. The United States doesn't do win-win cooperation at all. Instead of even trying that, and instead of having a facade of doing that, United States and its proxy Canada has said, listen, you supposedly assassinated someone within Canada, and that's human rights abuses. The United States loves doing that. They wave the human rights abuse flag anytime they want to overthrow a government. And so the leader, Modi of India, should be pretty concerned, because the United States wants India on side. They're using the stick entirely because they don't have a carrot left anymore. And they have to be afraid of regime change operations within India at this point, because the United States doesn't have other options. That is the entire playbook of the United States at this point. Okay, so we see here a survey 1 year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine found vast differences in opinions expressed by respondents in the West from those in China, India, Russia, and Turkey. Respondents across 9 European Union countries. The US and UK were more likely to say that the conflict would produce a world divided between two blocs led by China and the United States, while those in 4 non-Western nations were more likely to choose a more even distribution of global power among multiple countries. So that's the thing where the United States is offering a either unipolar or a Cold War type of mentality, and China is just not participating in this. China is saying, like, listen, we don't want to be rivals with the United States. We don't want to compete with you. We're not going to argue with you. We're not going to fight with you. We just want to do a parallel path. We want to forge our own way and not be struggling with American-made obstacles in our path. And other countries see this. They say, like, listen, China doesn't want to be a block of its own. They just want to kind of be left alone. And they see that the United States is saying, choose us or choose China. And so that's the kind of situation these other countries find themselves in, which is either what they view as a more even distribution of global power if they pivot more towards China, or if they pivot towards the United States, they have to get ready for a global power competition between United States and China for a new Cold War. And obviously, one of those visions of the future makes more sense for these countries. They don't want to be brought into a Cold War. And China is not forcing them to choose sides. The United States is forcing them to choose sides. Okay, what else do we have here? There's new challenges for U.S. foreign policy. Putting too much us or them pressure on these countries risks them leaning more conclusively towards China. Again, I've talked about this so many times. I just talked about it, but I will reiterate this. China has a very winning strategy here. The United States says, choose us or them. China says, just work with everyone. I mean, if it benefits your country, that's what you're supposed to be doing. And these countries look at it and say, well, the United States is kind of trying to screw us over here, and China's just saying, do whatever is best for our country. One of those is such a persuasive argument. It boggles the mind that the United States isn't trying to do the exact same thing. I don't think it's capable of doing the exact same thing at this point, because the United States still views itself as at the end of history. They view themselves as the sole superpower. And sure, they want to use China as a punching bag. So that's why they're doing this us or them thing. But they still view themselves as having the ability to dictate terms to all of these other countries, and these other countries don't like it. China has a much more persuasive strategy for dealing with this. Okay, so as BRICS sets its sights on expansion, which we know that they've expanded in all the right directions, significant disputes among core members. Again, I don't know if there are really significant disputes. I mean, sure, they mentioned China, India here. Okay, whatever. There's very minor border disputes between China and India, which are a remnant of colonialism. Russia and China had equally as bad border disputes, and they managed to resolve them. And we see that India is decoupling from the West to a large extent because of these recent accusations that Canada has lodged against them. And I just don't see India choosing to be a part of the Western-led order, given the fact that they don't really benefit from it. I mean, countries like India, countries like the Philippines have been very cheaply doing the very low-paying service jobs that the United States needs done and United States workers don't want to do. So India has been within the sphere of influence of the United States, and they've not benefited from that. I mean, at one point in time, India and China were world superpowers. They were roughly equivalent in terms of wealth, in terms of prosperity. But India, letting themselves be subservient to the United States, has not benefited. And so India at this point, they have to pivot towards China. They have to pivot towards Russia. It's not a hard sell for them to pivot towards Russia because they've always been really good friends with Russia. But it's a little bit harder of a sell to pivot towards China. But I think they're going to do it. I mean, all indications do show that they're going to do it. And something smart that I hope China does is I hope China the Permanent Security Council of the United Nations. I hope that China lobbies to have India be a permanent member of the Security Council. Countries like France, countries like the United Kingdom, they're not powerful enough countries to actually be on that Security Council. India is a growing power. They have a far better case to be made versus the United Kingdom or France being on that Security Council. And so China, if they're really smart, they would be the ones campaigning for India to have a Security Council seat, because it doesn't really hurt them at all to have India on board. I mean, any country can use their veto power there, so like it's not a big deal on the other nations to have India up there, and it would just help India to bury the hatchet with China if China's the one campaigning for them to be on the Security Council. So that would be my strategy. Let's see if they actually go with that, because India definitely wants a permanent seat on the Security Council. India and China have been able to collaborate on BRICs, work through BRICs institutions such as the New Development Bank. Okay. China and India are also members of another common bloc, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Past decades, when the United States or Western European countries talked about globalization, they talked about universal interest. Countries in the South felt, well, maybe there's something to that. Maybe there are global interests. But I know that since the financial crisis of 2007, there's a growth of a mood that which suggests, hey, listen, what you sold us as a global interest is actually your parochial interest, and we want to put forward our own national interest. So something to think about here is when the last financial crisis of 2007, 2008 happened, what the West did, and mostly the United States did, was they punish the countries downstream of them. So any consequences of the global crisis, they push them, they kick the can down. And they were able to do that because the United States dollar was upstream of all these other currencies. And so they were able to mess with the financial institutions and things like the various fiat currencies in order to lessen the impact of the global recession, which the United States caused. So not only was the United States the one responsible for the recession, but they made sure that the consequences of the recession were felt most strongly by other nations. And I would say that was actually when the BRICS countries and when the rest of the world recognized that you can't trust the United States here. They're going to punish you in order to benefit themselves. So many countries are making a calculation. They'll say Chinese capital, whether it's private or public capital, it's not a utopia, it's not a salvation, but it's certainly not coming with the kinds of conditionalities that are imposed by the International Monetary Fund. So I was talking about that earlier. The IMF, if you take loans from the IMF, you're going to be poorer in the long term. That's what research does show. So far, the United States has yet to directly challenge BRICS, though a growing chorus in Washington has expressed alarm over the calls abroad for de-dollarization that could further limit the effectiveness of United States sanctions. In the face of this, Rashan said he hoped that sober minds in Washington will prevail as the multipolar model advances. There may be a shift going on, and the United States might have to come to terms with that rather than contest the BRICS project, this new non-alignment project. Okay, so interesting article. And this article is by Tom O'Connor, and it is in Newsweek. And so just my kind of final thoughts here is, yes, this article ends very optimistically, saying the United States just has to get used to this new normal. I don't think the United States has the ability to get used to this new normal. The United States has inherited the colonial mindset of its European forefathers. And to them, the only way they can continue to be successful, because they're not really a productive nation as it is, they're a country that focuses on the financial economy instead of the real economy. They don't really make things anymore. And so, like, if other countries just quit trading with the United States today, the United States really couldn't function as a country anymore. Like, it would plummet. Countries like Iran, countries like Russia, actually do have the capacity to be self-sustaining. They have the autonomy to be self-sustaining if they need to be. They're still trying to work with other countries because they want to cooperate, but the United States doesn't have that anymore. They lack the capability to do that. I was reading an article, I think I'm probably going to cover the article anyways, which is that it's saying that the United States was trying to build icebreakers to break ice for trade routes around the North and South Pole areas. And it turns out the United States just lacks the capability anymore to build these icebreakers. Russia has dozens of them. China has a number of icebreakers. But the United States lacks the capability. They lack the expertise to do that. And a lot of people tend to think that, well, the kind of laptop class people, they're the ones that really like have the know-how, the knowledge, and they're like really special and unique. But people tend to think that manual labor, physical labor types of job, the more vocational types of interest, things like welding, plumbing, et cetera, electrical work, people think that those are largely interchangeable, that you could just get someone to do those different jobs, a wide variety of jobs. And that's not what we're finding. When it comes to bending the metal to make the icebreakers, the United States just lacks that expertise anymore because they haven't done it in decades. And so that expertise is gone. The people retired, the people passed on from old age, the people lost that knowledge through Alzheimer's. I mean, any number of reasons, but the thing is, at this point, the United States is not a functional country anymore. It's a country where, in order to provide wealth, in order to provide money to its citizens, it convinces other countries to use the United States dollar for trade and as a reserve currency. And when they need to, they'll just move a decimal place on some accounting sheet in order to provide more wealth for its nation. But other countries are realizing that only works to a certain point. That only works if these other countries continue to allow themselves to be the punching bag of the United States. And we're seeing that that is not the case. These other countries, you don't have to believe me. Look at what these other countries are doing. Look at what Ethiopia is doing. Look at what Argentina is doing. Look at what Saudi Arabia is doing, et cetera, et cetera. These countries either are joining or want to join Russia and China. You don't see countries wanting to join the United States at this point. Like, there's no countries that are like, yes, we're going to be better off if we join the United States. That just doesn't happen anymore because they've realized that the primary examples of the United States benefiting other countries such as Japan and such as Germany, both of those countries have been screwed over in pretty recent history within the past few decades. So anyways, that's what I'll leave you with. This has been an exceedingly long video. Thank you for sticking with me. It's been interesting. It's been fun for me to talk about this stuff. I got finished building the workroom, so we're going to have more advances in terms of content creation. I'm going to be more on the ball with content creation. We're going to a format of one long form video every single day. So interesting change ups. We're going to be doing some written content in the future once we get up and running for all the long form content. We might go back to short form content, but it wasn't enough of an engaging aspect that we feel like doing that right now. If I get into interviews and like get into debates and there's some like really good gotchas, really good like mic drop moments, maybe we'll do some short form content again. We do understand how to do that short form content now, so it's easy to do in the future. But yeah, that's kind of the future of this channel. Thank you for sticking with me. You've probably noticed within the past couple months, but YouTube has completely like removed us from recommendations. So we went from thousands of viewers to dozens of viewers. I'm going to be bringing that up further in the future through doing interviews on other more popular channels. So don't worry about it. I'm not overly worried about it. I just wanted to thank you, people who are not as influenced by the recommendation algorithm. Thank you for sticking with me. We are going to be improving this channel. We have a lot in store for you. So I hope you have a good rest of your day. Please like this channel, subscribe, or like this video, subscribe to our channel, and provide a comment in the comment box. I love reading them. Thanks, and have a good day. Bye.